In this episode, we're going to hear from a realtor who found something unexpected when she went to assess a home. Then we hear a crazy story from a police officer who responds to an incident at a morgue. Then finally, we hear from a temp agency worker who was led to believe he was helping people and not hurting them. But before we get into the stories, if you want strange and weird news every single day, visit dreadsarmy.com. And if you want to be part of the discussion, sign up for the forums and let's chat with each other. Now let's get to the stories. I'm a realtor in Willow Springs, Missouri. That's part of the Ozark Mountains, and very near to Mark Twain National Forest. I don't know if that has any bearing on what I saw, mostly because I'm not even sure what it was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's what happened just last June. My office got a phone call from a woman whose grandmother had recently passed on. She had inherited her grandmother's house, which was barely within the town limits of Willow Springs. Even though I'd been living here for 28 years, I'd never been aware of the place. And this is a very small town, with only a couple thousand residents. It was that remote, set at the end of a dirt road that wound through the mountains. The client was living in California, and she told me she wanted to sell the house, but she wouldn't be able to come to Missouri. She said she hadn't been back here in many years, and had no idea what condition the house was in. She did say it was a very old house, built over 100 years ago, and might need some repairs before it was marketable. Basically, my first step would be to evaluate the property and let her know what I found. The lawyer's office dropped off a key, and I drove out to the house, almost getting lost along the way. It was set way back in the woods, and the driveway was unmarked, not even a mailbox. After passing it once, I backtracked and took a guess, turning down the driveway. It was only when I saw the house number on the front of the door that I knew I had found the place. It was in more of a state of disrepair than I expected. The client had told me her grandmother had lived out the last of her days here, but it looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was badly in need of repair, starting to cave in on one section. The paint was peeling and the steps were broken. There was a set of bulkhead doors on the side of the house, secured with a rusted chain and padlock. I made a mental note to ask my client for the key. I carefully picked my way through the tall weeds to the steps, watching out for snakes. We have rattlers here, you know, and this looked like the perfect setting for them. I fit the key into the lock and opened the door, not quite knowing what to expect. I actually was pleasantly surprised. Although it smelled a bit musty inside, the interior didn't look too bad at all. You could tell my client's grandmother had cared for her home. There were crocheted doilies on the tables and TV stand, and simple but pretty curtains hung in the windows, probably hand-sewn. The place was clean, no dirty dishes or trash. It was just dusty and needed airing out. I walked around inspecting the condition of the walls and the ceiling, trying to spot any issues that needed repair. Beyond the roof and exterior, it didn't look too bad. In the house, being quite large and set on 3 acres, would no doubt bring in a pretty penny on the market. I figured I'd better take a peek in the basement, even though I was unable to open the bulkhead doors to air it out. A lot of these older homes have dirt basements, but I had come prepared wearing old sneakers. I found the cellar door in the kitchen, painted white with a black cast iron sliding latch on it. I slid the bolt, opened the door, and flipped on the light. The lights didn't work. I flipped the switch on and off again, but the bulb was obviously burnt out. For a minute, I thought of skipping the basement until the next time I came, but I wanted to be able to provide the client with an accurate home value. I went back to the kitchen and rummaged through the drawers. Thankfully, I found a flashlight. I shined the beam down the stairs. Yep, just as I expected, it was a dirt floor. The stairs looked okay though. I swung the beam around a bit, checking for broken boards. It was then that I noticed something concerning. There were scratch marks on the inside of the door. Claw marks like the kind a dog makes when they want to get in. I examined them in the light. They ran pretty deep. The door would have to be replaced. Filing that information away, I started down the steps, feeling bad for the old woman's dog, apparently locked in the cellar. I was careful going down, not knowing how long it had been since someone had used the stairs. I had to stop several times when I ran into cobwebs to wipe them off my face. I was getting a little creeped out, but then I was finally at the bottom. The only windows were tiny rectangular squares set high up. It was pretty damn dark. I tried to focus on looking for foundation issues, but I was starting to feel uneasy. You know how if you have your eyes closed, sometimes you can tell when somebody comes into a room, even if you don't hear their footsteps. Something about the way the air shifts, like the space you're in seems smaller when you share the room with someone else. Maybe that sounds crazy, but as I moved further into the dark basement, shining my beam on those stone walls and dirt floor, I had a terrible certainty that something was down there with me. My heart started to pound and I started to panic, swinging my flashlight beam around erratically, trying to see what it was. I knew something was there. And then I saw it. It was crouched up on the rafters, a dark shape as big as a man. My flashlight beam caught the yellow reflection of its eyes. And then I saw a flash of teeth. I said, "Holy crap," and I stumbled back a step, but I was afraid to turn my back on it. It seemed to know that I had seen it. It shifted position, and I suddenly saw wings. Great, terrible, dark wings, unfolding from its body like it was preparing to come after me. I screamed and ran for the stairs. Unfortunately, I stumbled and dropped my light, but I was too afraid to go back for it. Thank God I didn't fall. I just careened on through the dark until I hit the staircase, and then scrambled up as fast as I could. I heard a noise behind me, and I was absolutely terrified knowing this thing was gaining on me. I took those stairs 2 at a time, praying I didn't trip again, and by the grace of God, I made it to the top before it caught me. I barreled through the door and slammed it, bolting the latch and leaning back against it, trying to catch my breath, and that's when I heard it, scratching down low on the door, just like a dog that wants to be let out. I ran from the house without even locking it behind me. I jumped in my truck and took off. I drove like a madman out of the woods, wanting nothing more than to reach town. Whatever that creature was, I never wanted to see it again. I didn't take on the account. I called the client's lawyer and said I'd gone out there and the front door was wide open, so I decided not to go in case there were vagrants inside. Then I told him, after seeing how far out of town the property was, I had decided it wasn't a good fit for me. I mailed him back the key. The image of the property still haunts me, and sometimes I wonder, is that why the bulkhead doors were padlocked shut? As a police officer, I can tell you we get called out on some strange stuff. But when something really unexplainable happens, it usually gets brushed under the rug. The higher-ups don't want us to get a reputation for being wackos. And I mean, I can understand that. But if more people were allowed to tell their stories, then all of this stuff could become less taboo. Anyway, it's nice to be able to tell a story about this here anonymously. I know that most of your listeners are less judgmental of the unknown. I've been on the force in one of the Salt Lake City suburbs for about 12 years. When this happened, me and my partner were working the night shift. We were called to investigate a suspected break-in at a morgue. When we arrived, the custodian was waiting for us out front. He told us that he had been mopping one of the corridors, and he had seen something move in his peripheral vision. He said he looked up and saw a person sprint from one side of the hallway to the other. He wasn't able to give much of a description, though. He said that he hadn't seen the person very clearly since they had flashed by so fast. It was just a dim outline, but it was enough for him to be sure that someone was in there. He had gotten freaked out and went outside to make the call to the station. My partner and I went into the building. We called out to anyone who might be inside, but we got no answer. So we began to do a sweep. We walked down the central corridor with our hands on our guns. We were going slow. We had to check every room on each side of the hallway. It was creeping me out a little bit, to be honest. I mean, I've been around plenty of dead bodies and stuff, but I didn't know what kind of individual we were chasing. Who breaks into a morgue? Every now and then we would call out for an intruder to show themselves. We were about halfway down the corridor when I got to a room with the light off. It was pitch black inside. I flipped a switch expecting to find the intruder hiding, but it was just the waiting room for visiting relatives. Then I heard my partner call out, "Hey, stop, turn around." I got a big surge of adrenaline and swung back out into the corridor. I saw that my partner was pointing his gun towards something at the end of the hallway. He said, "She went around that corner." The custodian was back by the door. When he realized which way she had gone, he yelled out, "She's trapped. There aren't any exits that way." We were concerned that with the person being trapped, they might do something crazy. We had the custodian lock himself in the waiting room for safety. Then we started advancing down that hallway. We kept calling out to the woman to show herself. We made it clear that we weren't there to hurt her. I made it to the end of the hallway first. I had my back against the wall and I looked around the corner. I saw her. The woman was standing by a big gray door that was partially opened. The lights were off in that area, so it was hard to see her clearly, but I could see she was holding a gun. She had long blonde hair. I stepped out from behind the corner to begin approaching her, but she went through the door and disappeared into the room behind it and closed the door behind her. I ran up to the door and pulled at the handle. She had locked it. I was banging on it and calling out to her, but there was no answer. The door had a deadlock on it. I yelled out to my partner to go get the custodian to unlock it. It seemed to take forever. Finally, the custodian came around the corner with my partner. When he saw which door it was, he just said, "This door? Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, she went through there and locked it behind her." He said, "That's the cold room. The door doesn't lock from the inside." I didn't know how to respond to that, but he found the right key and unlocked the door. I'm yelling, "We're coming in, put your hands up." I had my gun ready and got inside the room. My partner was swinging his mag light to light up the corners. The custodian hit the light switch and the room lit up. It was empty except for some equipment against the wall and several gurneys in the middle of the room. All of the gurneys were empty except for one that was covered in a white sheet. The sheet was covering what appeared to be a body underneath it. I remember thinking how ludicrous this whole thing was. What a place to decide to hide yourself. I approached the gurney, and it was the smell that made me pause. It smelled like a corpse. I'd been around plenty of them. I finally pulled the sheet down, and the woman was lying there. She had straggly blonde hair all around her face. There was no question in my mind that this was the woman I had seen by the door. I finally came to my senses enough to check the tag on her toe. It said she had died the day before. We just stared at each other in disbelief. I mean, what can you say? We had all seen her, and we couldn't all be crazy. You could tell how shaken the custodian was. He had been working there a long time and never seen anything like it. I swear it had to be a ghost. I'm writing to you today because I work for a temp agency, and I just left the strangest government job, and I need to tell somebody about this. 4 months ago, I got a job working on a government project. On the first day of work, about 50 other temp workers and I walked into this huge empty warehouse. There were 6 men in suits sitting at a conference table, with a projector aimed at the wall. We were told to gather around the conference table to have a meeting before getting to work. One of the guys in a suit stood up and he gave a speech saying, "From this day forth, we were heroes." We talked about the children's lives we would be saving by working hard and sending pallets of much-needed food to the places in the world that needed them most. He went on and on about how every minute we waste is a children's life that could have been saved. He appeared to wipe a tear from his eye and left the room. I'm pretty sure that tear wasn't sincere, but it set the mood for the rest of the 4 months. We all worked like animals, sending truckloads of pallets to the children in need. I worked as a forklift driver, and I didn't take a single break for the entirety of the time I worked. I would just take a quick lunch break, then I'd be back on the forklift and load pallets into the trucks to be sent off. The pay was pretty good for a temp job, but for a government job, it seemed to be absolute chaos. If OSHA inspected our warehouse, they would have shut it down in minutes. We didn't wear any protective gear. We didn't take any breaks. And we worked in a poorly ventilated warehouse without AC in the middle of August. We didn't receive any training whatsoever. No food or water was provided. I could go on and on. Every night after my 12-hour shift, I would be so exhausted that I had trouble making the drive home safely. But the pay was pretty good. About 3 weeks into the job, I got promoted to a management position. I was pumped because I got more pay. But I didn't know the first thing about how to manage an operation like that. The biggest perk was that they brought in an air conditioner trailer for me to do the paperwork in. The other workers looked at me with hate, but I couldn't complain. One day, a truck drove off the loading dock with a forklift driver still inside. The forklift fell off the back of the truck, and the pallet he was carrying crashed on top of him. I shut down the operation and checked on the forklift driver. He was in bad shape. He couldn't move because of the pain, and a bucket of chemicals that were in the pallet poured all over him, and his skin was burning. As we were trying to help get him out of there, all 6 of the suited men ran out to the parking lot. The one that did the presentation on the first day screamed at us for halting production. I explained to him that the forklift driver, we'll call him Peter, could have died and needs immediate medical attention. The suited man had a breakdown that I was undermining his orders and was selfishly putting my friend's needs ahead of the poor children's needs. I was speechless. He screamed at everyone to get back to work, and they did. And everyone just ignored him and kept working. The suited men pulled out rubber gloves and picked up Peter and took him into my trailer. They locked the door, and I didn't see them for the rest of the shift. We just closed one dock where the forklift was blocking accessibility and continued working feverishly. I had never been in management before when there was an on-site injury, so I did some research and learned the standard operating procedure is to fill out an employee report injury form. Thinking I was doing the right thing, I filled out all the information, printed it out, and gave it to the suited man. The next day I went to my trailer and it was still locked. I knocked on the door, and immediately one of the men pushed me back and closed the door to the trailer. I handed him the form, and he immediately asked me how many copies I made. I just said the one, and he asked which computer I used to make the form. I explained I used my home computer, and he immediately took me to his car and had me give instructions to my address. We pulled up to my house, and he followed me close behind. I went inside to grab my computer. He immediately grabbed my computer and threw it in his trunk. I started yelling at him, and he gave me $2,000 in cash to get another one. My computer was only worth $300, so I took it. On the last day, I walked in, and the trailer was gone, and the warehouse was almost empty. The only thing in there was a conference table and the suited men. I walked up to them, and they handed me an envelope with my last paycheck in it. They said that the project was top secret, and I couldn't talk about anything that had happened here. I agreed, and I wished them the best. I walked outside and opened the envelope. There was a $20,000 bonus in there, and a note that said silence. The temp agency has me working for a pest control company now, so things have settled down drastically in my life. I do often wonder what we were sending off by the truckload and whom we were sending them to. It wasn't food for children like we were told. It was some sort of deadly chemical, and I don't know who was ordering so much of it. I also don't like the fact that those people know where I live. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. Also, make sure to check out dreadsarmy.com, where you'll find all of my stories and multiple strange and weird news posted every single day. If you want to be part of the discussion, check out the forums on Dread's Army. We also have a Facebook group so you don't miss out on any updates. Thanks and take care.